CJ Stroud drafted by the Texans number 2 overall last week. It's highly unlikely that you didn't know that already, but just in case, wanted you to know that. And I came across an interview of him on The Shop, LeBron's show. In this episode, LeBron's not in it, but Maverick Carter, Paul Rivera, and Lou Young are talking to CJ Stroud. And CJ Stroud, before you accuse me of claiming that CJ Stroud has a chip on his shoulder when he doesn't, like CJ Stroud talks about the chip on his shoulder in this interview. And we played some of it on Payne and Pendergast this morning. I was a little bit surprised, but then understood upon reflecting on it that a lot of our listeners thought, like, man, this sounds like this chip might be a little too big. That's a chip on CJ Stroud's shoulder. I don't think it is. I think I've been really pleasantly surprised the more and more I learn about CJ Stroud, about just how much looser and how much more of a personality he has than I thought he did when I first started looking at CJ Stroud during the football season these last couple of years. But also like that, I think that he's got an understanding of just how big you need to let that chip on your shoulder be, to the point where it goes from motivating you to crushing you. Remember, Johnny Manziel said that the chip on his shoulder would turn from a what was it? A Frito to a Dorito if he was disrespected too much. Johnny Manziel, I feel guilty even comparing CJ Stroud to Johnny Manziel. But you worry sometimes that the chip on the shoulder is going to be too big. So this is first on The Shop. He was telling a story about how Mel Tucker at Colorado had been the first to recruit him, and I'll give it a little more context after we play it. But this part was interesting to me for a few reasons.
So I ended up playing them COVID year. My first touchdown in college was like a 50-yard run, and it was against Mel at Michigan State.
I remember.
So
I watched every snap you ever played.
For
Ohio
sure.
State, you know that.
So I went up to him after the game. I shook his hand. I said, "Thank you for putting trust in me." He was the first one. So
yeah, and like, thank you for putting trust in me. You were the first one. It's somebody says right here already. Let's see. Saw a lot of crying about this on Twitter this morning. If they brought in someone to compete for my job at the office and waited to tell me the day of, I'd be kind of pissy too. That's where we'll get to that part of it later. That's a juicier part of it. So some of the chatter about CJ Stroud has been things like, okay, you might have to earn his trust as a coach, or that he's not going to just accept what you're coaching and, without question. He's going to want to question and know exactly why you're saying it. I think that you start to get a feel for him as you go through this, and he'll explain more of it later, that, part of it is just, I think, that he's super, super competitive. And he's going to figure out a way to put a chip on his shoulder, no matter who it is, kind of like Tom Brady. And I'm going to keep coming back to Tom Brady in this, because so many of the stories about Tom Brady would sound, if Tom Brady hadn't made it and is an NFL quarterback, it would sound like, oh, wow, Tom Brady had too much of a chip on his shoulder. The way he was talking about how he was going to kick Drew Bledsoe's ass and take his job and all this stuff as he was a backup quarterback, that doesn't sound like a very good teammate. That's the vibe I get out of CJ Stroud, and I like it. So Mel Tucker, it was like the first from a big time school, and it's not even, like, no offense to Colorado, I know you're making great waves, but it's not even a big time school along the likes of Ohio State or USC. But people weren't really recruiting CJ Stroud at first, so he kind of remembers the people that did him favors, the people that he feels did right by him. And I like that. So the second one here was just kind of funny. They were asking about the biggest adjustment from high school to Ohio State, and it made me think about the state of Ohio specifically. It made me wonder about making the adjustment to Texas.
really just like the culture of Ohio. I mean, like being a Cali dude, it's tough. Sunlight is really real, to where like that vitamin D it helps you like get up every day and like have something to do. When it's cloudy out there and you're not used to that, it's kind of tough, man. Actually, I'm very appreciative of it, because now that's what I'm coming into the league. So that was my...
Yeah, he said sunlight, the vitamin D is real, and the sunlight's a thing. I don't know. Like, I'm not worried about it in Texas. Like, it's not as sunny in Houston as it is in LA, but it's certainly not as gloomy as it is in Ohio. And that's like, I can just remember in college, guys coming from Texas. Okay, yeah, no, I'm cool. I know it's going to be okay. Because I remember one of the biggest things was some of the football players from Texas would come to Cornell and the almost end up clinically depressed the first year because it's not the cold. Anybody can handle cold. It's the gray. It's the gloominess. It's the overall sense of impending doom and that the rapture it's on its way. It's that dark and awful and depressing. So I think other than like in January and February January when it's kind of misty and cloudy and hazy, I think we'll be all right. This is the part that got the headlines this morning when when I'll just let him tell the story. This got the headlines, and this is the thumbnail where he says exactly what he says here.
That was my mindset, like, man, how hard.
So he's talking about he started off talking about, wanting to take the hard way as a way to prepare himself for the future and for the NFL, and how the hard way is good.
How can I make it on myself to like be better? And Ohio State wasn't going to be easy. I had another quarterback I came in with that I knew I was going to play early. I was the backup, and next year they brought somebody else in. Quinn Ewers, the Texas quarterback, was the #1 player I think ever ranked. And they brought him like a week into fall camp, which is training camp for us, and I kind of felt disrespected. So
Did you really?
yeah, I didn't like that.
Yeah. And you can see, this is where it gets lost in the transcript sometimes, I think. He's just kind of like, yeah, I didn't like that. I guess my biggest question, man, the more I watch it, the more I like it a lot. I didn't like that, Like, hey, you know who didn't like it when his team drafted a quarterback in the first round? It was Aaron Rodgers. You know who didn't like it when his team drafted a quarterback in the first round? Oh, yeah, Brett Favre. He didn't like it when his team drafted a quarterback in the third round. Tom Brady. Like, none of these guys like it. And especially given that the context behind that story, and that's where it's weird, is Quinn Ewers and his parents wanted him to be able to take advantage of NIL. At that point in time, NIL wasn't legal in Texas, but it was in Ohio. So Quinn Ewers in August shows up to Texas, and that not at the request of the school. If you're Ohio State, you're probably thinking, all right, we got CJ Stroud. Now we'll stagger this a little bit. Quinn Ewers coming next year, and you just keep the pipeline rolling. Plus, you don't want to burn a year of eligibility on Quinn Ewers showing up in year one. But Quinn Ewers shows up, wants that NIL money, and CJ Stroud is had bided his time, waited, competed, got the starting job, and then all of a sudden this guy's showing up out of nowhere. And I think the way Ohio State handled it probably made it feel even a little bit, I don't know if it's sketchy is the right word, but here's how they handled it.
Did they talk you through it?
They told me the day he came.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's something.
Yeah, man, that's the way they do you. They recruit you till they love you, and then they just kind of let everything sort itself out. So far, I don't know if that title was clickbaity, as some of you had suggested, but I feel like he actually says he has a chip on his shoulder. We had concerns. People when they hear about a guy with a chip on his shoulder, or that this is what I just explained, but just in case, Ohio State didn't prefer Ewers to come in early, but they allowed him to. There was no way Ewers was going to win the job. He came on campus way too late. CJ overreacted to Ewers that season, right? But did he overreact? I mean, that's was it an overreaction, or was it just him putting a chip on his shoulder, or just viewing, hey, anything as a threat? Because he responded to it. The thing I worry about with guys who put a chip on their shoulder is, do they carry a grudge? Do you carry a chip on your shoulder and simultaneously carry a grudge? Because that's a big burden to carry. The other thing I'd wonder about is, okay, was he cool to Ewers, or was he a complete D-bag to Ewers? Either way, I mean, Favre was reportedly not all that great to Rodgers when he came in. I think Tom Brady and Garoppolo got along all right. It wasn't like Brady spent all his time tutoring Garoppolo or anything. But as long as it's still functioning, and as long as you still feel like you've got, a working relationship with everybody, that's the kind of drama that there is on a football team. The thing that is in some ways, pro football is more pure than college football, is that in pro football, it's an honest living. You've got your franchise quarterback The coaches are generally in on the franchise quarterback because if the franchise quarterback doesn't make it, the coach is out too. And that's pretty much the way it is. Like in college, you're recruiting kids and saying whatever it takes to get them in the door. And then a lot of times promises made are broken by the time guys actually get there. So I think there's a lot more room for hurt feelings. But I think the other reason that people are sensitive about this, Texans fans might be sensitive about this, is just simply because of the David Mulligetta scenario. And when it comes to, well, here's where he talks about the chip on his shoulder itself. And I am curious, you guys weigh in whether you think the chip's too big or not. I don't want to skew your vote, but I don't think it's too big. I don't want to be clickbaiting you the whole time here and having you think I'm building up to me destroying CJ Stroud or something, but I can understand why some people would be concerned about this. This is CJ Stroud about the chip on his shoulder.
Everything that I've done in my life has been earned, never given, and I pride myself on that. I think that's why I kind of have a chip on my shoulder a little bit. Like I have that dog in me just because I know I've been counted out multiple times. They brought in a guy 2 weeks before our first game, and I thought I was the guy. That just shows you, man, it's a business at the end of the day. Now I'm doing it for myself. I know the business that I'm in, that it is, in a sense, cutthroat.
Yeah, the business that I'm in is cutthroat, and that's to address what we've been talking about here. They brought in that guy 2 weeks before. That's right. That's where I think sometimes you got to let bygones be bygones and just realize, okay, at some point along the way, accept that. All right, Ewers showed up, and then Ewers, by the way, and like if that surprises you about Ewers turned right back around and went to Texas, obviously, after that. So, like, Ewers was very much about getting that money. Not that this is a Ewers versus CJ Stroud discussion or conversation, but I think that I'm going to play some Will Anderson from the shop as well after we get done with some of these clips. And I think there you're going to see you can see why Anderson is so loved by all these coaches. I mean, Anderson is old school college football, do it for the alma mater, like you laser focused on the team, all that stuff, where the vast majority of I shouldn't say the majority, a lot of other kids, and especially the star caliber ones, are concerned about NIL and all this other stuff. So I think that like Stroud is just hyper competitive, and just like a lot of hyper competitive people, whether it's Larry Bird or Kobe Bryant or anybody else, if there is any other pettiness or jealousness that comes along with it, I don't worry about it. Like, that's a good thing. Like, a lot of the stuff that you hear about Jordan and these other guys, like it's kind of glorified now when you talk about it. But if it was in the age of social media and 24/7 news coverage, people would find ways to Can you imagine Skip Bayless with all that coverage of those guys back then? Larry Bird, and the stuff that would go on about that. So so far I'm okay with the size of the chip. One of our texters on the radio show this morning, Payne and Pendergast, said that makes him sound like he's for himself and he might pull a Watson. This is what I think about that. When Watson pulled a Watson, obviously, I don't know how much he felt like there might be imminent doom from potential issues with his massage practices or his massage habits, but B, it was in the middle of one of the most dysfunctional and weird situations I've ever seen in professional football. So the entire Jack Easterby dynamic, however he felt about the McNairs at that point and the way things had operated, the way he felt about the fact that the Texans had fired Bill O'Brien, there was a lot that was very, very different about all that. So I'm not overly concerned about that. And I also think that, look, that's Deshaun Watson is Deshaun Watson, and Deshaun Watson, like, if anything, Deshaun Watson said a lot of the right things all the time and was, I think, more guarded and careful about things than CJ Stroud was. Sean and I were talking about this morning. I think CJ Stroud is just kind of, especially now that the stress of the draft is off of him, I think he's just kind of loose and says what he's going to say, and there will probably be some interesting things that he says along the way. And frankly, I'm here for it. So let's see. Oh, okay. Now to highlight the storytelling side of Stroud and like the looser side of Stroud, and Sean noticed this when we were playing it this morning. and we've noticed it through these press conferences, for somebody that was kind of thought of as like stiff or just like kind of super serious all the time. And Ohio State fans told me beforehand, like, no, he loosens up. He's a really good storyteller. So this is him telling a story about when he was first entering college before there was any NIL, and he was living kind of like, the way college students used to live before all this NIL money.
I came in to the All-American Bowl in San Antonio, Texas, that we all play in the high school for the All-Star game.
So this would be January of his senior year before he goes to enroll at Ohio State.
And my mama just gave me like $200. And so I took the 200 and I like balled out at the mall when I got to San Antonio. And that's all the money I had. And so getting to college, I had like $10. And I didn't have like no toiletries. I didn't have
Nothing.
I didn't have much. So I like the first night, and my mom is mad that I did this. She's like, you dummy, like you should have spent your money. Like my mom is amazing, bro. She's hilarious. She's
Like, Mom, I don't got no deodorant, but I got some fresh ass sneakers.
Right.
Bro.
So I'm laying on the kind of like a prison mat. There's a dorms are built. Yeah. So I had that, but
Well, you didn't even have sheets?
Mm-mm.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I was struggling, man.
So that's funny. Like that's again, I think that image of sometimes athletes all driving Ferraris and everything in the pre-NIL days, it was few and far between the guys that actually lived like that. And a lot of times if you didn't like you learn how to manage your meager expenses. And but the difference is, okay, guys get good at managing their meager expenses, but then all of a sudden you leap up to managing your 30 million guaranteed expenses. It's a whole different deal. I do like the fact that because of NIL, I think a lot of these guys are savvier, and we'll play this clip in a second. And also, I'm going to address a bunch of the comments after these last couple of clips, and then we'll go on to Will Anderson. But I think coming in on the lean side of things, and I can remember him talking about in a previous interview when some of those other guys, when the other pros would come back and kind of treat these guys and tell them to show them like the material niceties that can come with all of it. There was a huge stark difference between pre-NIL and post-NIL. When NIL did kick in, I think Stroud I think he really showed his maturity in the way that he was prepared for.
July 31st, 2021. I remember the date. I was jumping for joy. I was finna kill it.
506 being
Yeah.
Wirehead.
Right. I was finna kill it. I'm like, I'm finna kill it. But the person I'm in, I'm very methodical, and I think about what I do before I do it. So I didn't accept nothing. I had dudes hitting me up. I want to do this, switch you that.
How did you?
Yeah. So, and we've talked about this before. He took his time with it, and then at one point in the process, he says he kind of, because I think it was during the season, he told the Mulligetta and his people who were handling his NIL stuff, not allowed to represent him as a player, but as an NIL, it's very tricky. Just to back off on it because he wanted to focus on football. So like that, I think this has gone very quickly from something that we wondered whether NFL teams would be leery of guys who got a lot of NIL or worried, who sought out or made a lot of money from NIL. I think it's starting to look like, man, if you can demonstrate that you handle your business well while also performing well, then it's a check in your favor compared to back in the day when you just wondered, like, all right, how's this guy going to handle it? And some change in his pocket. Not everybody can handle it. They end up not just blowing the money, but also just being distracted by all the things they have available to them. Okay. So this also, and this is interesting. That's not Maverick Carter right there, but the other guy asking questions. Maverick Carter, LeBron's business partner. I'm intrigued by him talking to CJ Stroud about all of this, and maybe I'll, kind of thinking about like, not that David Mulligetta is a competitor, but in the same industry, how he goes about all his business.
You figure out who was going to help you.
So how did you figure out who is going to help you?
Figure that part of
Right.
the business out.
So like with Brian, like I always watch the shop. So like when he talks about like building a team, that was like kind of my mindset when NIL came out. I need to build a team. So the first guy that actually hit me up was Brian Burney, my marketing guy with Athletes First, and then my guy David Mulligetta. So I signed with them through Justin Fields. It took a process for me to get kind of used to the whole thing. So when they came along, it made everything a lot easier.
Yeah. So I think like building a team and all of that. Which, I mean, in some respects, it's just, okay, you're hiring your agent. If you have a good agent, especially nowadays, they're handling all of that for you. But learning to rely on those guys, I think that's important. I know whenever anybody hears David Mulligetta as a Texans fan, you get really nervous. I'll go back to this over and over again. Mulligetta works for the client, and there's some clients are going to be more inclined to either want out if things get a little tough or what have you. I think I don't worry too much of that. I try to channel my Caserio and not worry about what's right or what's wrong or what guys should do or what shouldn't do. That's just the way it is. I'm not saying about CJ Stroud specifically, but anybody in general. The best way to avoid that situation is to not have a dysfunctional situation and to be winning football games. So hopefully it's all a moot point, depending on how these next couple of years go, by the time it's time for CJ Stroud to get a new deal. As far as, so the other person, it was either Lou Young or Paul Rivera, asks him how he'll feel, what it will feel like having the starting job from the beginning for the first time in his life, if that's how it works out. The guy was cool about asking it a certain way. But if that's how it works out, what's that going to feel like?
And it's in me, not on me. Everything I'm doing, people always ask me, man, are you surprised, or are you shocked, or are you nervous? I'm not nervous really anything. When I feel like I'm walking in my purpose from God. And of course, it's going to be a transition. It's going to be something you learn from, but I'm going to go in with complete confidence in myself and what I know God put into me.
So it's in me, not on me. I like that too. I never heard that before. These guys have such good little catchphrases. They're like likable Jack Easterbys. They have and they're at the ready. So they're probably reading from their motivational daily calendar or something, or a tweet they get every day. But I like that they live by it. These kids are so much more prepared than we were back in the day. We just went in and tried to squat as much as we could, and then drank some beer and then showed up. But these guys actually think about stuff. They're deep. So the other question kind of related to that was, what's it going to be like establishing yourself as a leader amongst grown men?
I think that's the beauty of the NFL is being a quarterback, man. That's being a leader and a coach on the field.
Exactly.
So
From
it's
day
something.
one.
Again, I think I'm a natural born leader. You guys, my friends, I don't play around. I'm very, I don't play. I'm very self-disciplined. I don't need nobody to get me up. I don't need nobody to convince me to go work out. I'm gonna go on my own and do what I gotta do. And I think that kind of that mindset and that tenacity is gonna gravitate people towards me.
Yeah, for me, my high school coach.
Oh, here's a Will Anderson. There's a stark difference when you go to Will Anderson's voice from CJ Stroud's.
Yeah, for me,
So we'll get to that in a second. Let me rewind this a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to take some comments before we get to Will Anderson. But I do think the one word that comes to mind over and over again as I'm watching CJ Stroud is that I think one thing that might jump out to some people as too much of a chip on his shoulder, or what have you, another person might just say he's just real, he's just putting it out there. And I think there's times when he can laugh and be loose and tell stories, but there's other times where he's just going to say yeah, I was pissed off. Think about how most of us handle this. Or maybe I'm crazy and this isn't how most people handle it. But when you're in a situation where you might feel threatened, feel jealous, whatever it might be, as you get older and as you mature, you learn how to suppress it. I think first you learn how to not outwardly show it. And then secondly, you try hard to repress it and say, all right, look, it's irrational, or it's not right for me to be jealous, or let's be sure that I don't take this out on other people or whatever. At least that's what I try to do. That's what I'd like to think that I do a lot of the time. I don't know how successful I am at it, but I think there's also something sometimes I wish I could just be flat out yeah, you know what? Screw this guy. What have I not proven enough? And then you let it digest a little bit, and then you let it fuel you, and you move forward. So a matter of how much you let it show outwardly or not is sometimes the biggest difference. I think a lot of us have felt what CJ Stroud feels at various points in our lives, whether it could be personal relationships, business relationships, work relationships, whatever it is. I think you feel it. You just might not necessarily verbalize it. And one of the comments that I'll get to there was interesting. And I think that Yeah, okay, Tiff. I understand that it was from Ohio State, not the Texans. I'm confused. No clickbait title now, Seth. Come on, Tiff. You know me better than that. When would I ever clickbait you? Everything in here was legitimate. We talked about that one earlier. I'm not going to answer your questions about Tex-Mex just this moment. Okay, so I think you'll want your QB to compete. Yes, 100%. He's like this because he wants to win. Yes, I agree with you there too. Next, Tom Brady. I think that's the appropriate comparison, and anything else would be unfair to him. I think from day one we have to evaluate him as if he's the next Tom Brady and nothing else in between. Yeah, I look at it as the same Michael Jordan. I took that personally attitude. Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, I should have, if I do this, if I go back and do an edited video off of this, I'll just go ahead and do the little Michael Jordan. I took that as an insult. I'd say, yep, it's worked for him. Bob Kraft told, yep. A lot of Tom Brady comparisons. So, yes. I thought Georgia recruited Stroud as well. He chose OSU at the end. Yeah, Tiff. I feel like we're having miscommunications here because I never said that nobody else recruited him. I said that I said that USC was late to recruiting him. Yeah, so I don't know what you're talking about, Tiff. I feel like you got started drinking early today. The gloomy vibe was about the Ohio State. I didn't like that. I wish I could have that level of production from something I don't like. Yeah, I think that is true. Like it's there's things that, especially quarterbacks are like pitchers. Like they're wired a little bit different, and sometimes pitchers get away with more I guess diva type behavior because there's not the same interpersonal dynamic with pitchers in a baseball team as there is with quarterbacks in the offense or quarterbacks in the entire team. So I think like quarterbacks have to learn to suppress it a little bit more. But look at like, oh golly, aw shucks, Phillip Rivers, who doesn't swear, but like really like watch him and watch the way he talks and looks and competes. Like that dude was a super competitive, kind of wacky quarterback. And that's just the way a lot of them are wired. He's going to learn a lot from Case. You know, Case has a chip on his shoulder too. I mean, I read Case's book, and Case puts a part in there about talking about Case Keenum. For those of you that didn't realize or remember, Case Keenum is a quarterback on the team right now. There are no backups or starters right now, as Nick Caserio said the other day. But presumably he's going to end up being C.J. Stroud's backup at some point. But Case has a chip on his shoulder, and I think it fueled him through lasting as long as he has in the NFL over a decade now. This is what J-Rock said. I want him to be looking forward rather than the past. Yeah, and I think, and it's important to note, too, that this interview was done before the draft. I think it might have been right in Kansas City, right before the draft, or at least it was done right, because both he and Will Anderson are kind of talking about what's about to happen. So, yeah, I think that's fair. I think he also loosened up a lot after everything. Like at the time, think about everything swirling around the S2 test and everything. He probably felt a little bit under attack. So, I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's actually good. Let's see. You make great Texans content. Rockets Chop Shop is the best for Rockets. Who is the best for Stros? Thank you for the compliment. That's a good question. If you guys can answer that in the comments. I know a couple that I don't want to piss anybody off. I like the Locked On Stros. I'll tell you my daily, or at least like when I try to, I like Locked On Stros that I listen on the podcast. They also do YouTube. And I usually because they give me good info with a few bullet points and angles that maybe I hadn't thought about before. Those guys are like hardcore fans, but they're very educated. Let's see. I don't think his chip is too big. I just think he misinterpreted Ewers coming in. Like you said, Ohio State preferred Ewers, didn't come on campus earlier. Ewers wasn't even second on the depth chart. Yeah, I think a lot of it is like, I think he maybe either subconsciously or consciously just decided not to even acknowledge the actual story that Ewers wasn't brought in by Ohio State just because it was good fuel for him. Like, oh, okay. I won the job, but I still got to keep earning it. Like, okay, yeah, I'm going to use that, and I'm gonna squirrel it away, and I'm going to keep using it to drive me. As somebody said earlier, like, I wish I could use that level of non-insult to motivate me. It is true. Sometimes sometimes you wish you're kind of like psychotically driven by stuff like that. Like you think Tom Brady, like being able to memorize and name every single quarterback in sequence that went before him is like is it mentally the most healthy thing to do? Probably not. Is Michael Jordan mentally healthy? Of course not. Nobody thinks any of those guys are healthy. Larry Bird, psycho. So yeah, give me a little bit of psycho in my life. I need that. I'll send any Ewers comments to Landry. I'll take the guy who thinks he's always going to be replaced if he doesn't perform well. So I'm good with this. Only time stuff like this bothers me is if they pout and that trickles down. Right. Yeah, exactly. And like, again, like it's kind of like in business, how sales cures everything. You can have a lot of messes and weird personal relationships and everything in business, but as long as sales are really good, it just tends to suppress all that other stuff. Just perform. And if you use it as fuel to perform, then it's good. When CJ had a little trouble his first couple of starts because of a shoulder issue, Day never wavered on him starting. Well, some of the fan base was clamoring for McCord to replace him. Let's see. Victim mentality, you can have him. I don't think he does, though. Like, and I guess a lot of it is just like, how do you ruminate about, the how does that player think about it and process it? Is he saying like, okay, all right, you're challenging me, I'm going to respond, versus like, oh, you're challenging me and I'm going to go into a hole and please no. I'm going to have a tell-all to 60 Minutes about what a jerk Ryan Day is. Like, he didn't do that. He performed. Like, without the performance, then I don't worry about it. If you like the video on Stroud, there's a video made by the Big Ten Network that gives Stroud's backstory and kind of why he is who he is. Thank you I've seen a lot of this content and like, yeah, I understand Stroud's backstory. I think sometimes it's overly simplified, though, too. So his backstory is really, really cool. And we've talked about it on here, and we played some of him talking about it. But for those of you who don't know, it had what he thought was a normal life. His father was a pastor in the church. Father got into a whole bunch of trouble when CJ was 12 or 13 years old. Father got sentenced to decades in prison. And like he had to learn at a very young age how to A, respond to that, and then B, play football, seek other role models, all of that good stuff. And his mom was obviously very important and very awesome for him there. But yeah, there's, like if some people wonder whether, okay, is he a little bit less likely to trust his coaches or what have you? Like, I don't want to overly simplify his backstory as being something that, because sometimes that can be turned against you. So like Dion talking about how he doesn't like to recruit offensive linemen who came from single family homes. I don't, if you overly simplify his backstory, then all of a sudden everything becomes a narrative about why he is the way he is. And I don't think it necessarily has to be that as complex as that. I think it's important to show that he's overcome a lot of adversity, and maybe like some of that chip on his shoulder and some of the things that drive him, he's managed to use it very, very productively. Let's see. If the Texans didn't take Stroud and ended up with a different QB, would y'all be torching him for this disrespect shtick at Ohio State? I wonder. I don't know. They probably wouldn't be talking about Stroud. We'd be talking about either Anthony Richardson or whomever else. Wasn't it you who said you kind of liked when offensive players were paranoid about losing their starting jobs? Seems like a good football trait to me. Yeah, I do. I do. I totally do. I wonder if I'm going to have to go back and change the title of this, because I think that thing where when you ask a question in the title, people always assume that they know what your opinion is. And then, so yeah, maybe I'll do that. When you ask a question, you're like, is it too big a chip on his shoulder? People assume you're answering, yes, it's too big a chip. I'm saying, no, I think it's an appropriate size chip. It's 7.8 grams of chip. Mills is done. Please don't overhype CJ. At least wait until training camp. I know. We'll overhype him. I don't think we have to worry about like CJ hearing the chatter or anything. If there's one thing that I've learned from Ohio State fans telling me this, and then also Ohio State fans coming after me at various times when I'm complimenting CJ but not complimenting him enough. I've learned that Ohio State is a pressure-filled environment for a quarterback, and he's faced a lot of this stuff already. I think the most exciting thing about Case Keenum being on the Houston Texans is that no one is more qualified to instill the love of H-Town in somebody. We talked about this on Payne and Pendergast. Oh, I was on Young Ari Gold's podcast last night, or YouTube channel, and we talked about this a little bit too. There's kind of something interesting going on in Houston where we had this diaspora of athletes where everybody and their brother was leaving, whether it be DeAndre Hopkins, J.J. Watt, George Springer, Carlos Correa, James Harden, I guess Russell Westbrook, even though he wasn't really here all that long, and various others, a whole bunch of people leaving. And now all of a sudden, in the last couple of years, especially this last year, you got like D'Amico saying flat out, no, I want to be here. I don't really care about the other places. I want to be here. I don't screw you, Denver. Honestly, Dana Holgerson before him came back, partly just because he just really wanted to be in Houston. And that's rare in football coaches. It's really rare in NFL coaches, and it's still not as rare, but still rare in college coaches to actually prefer a destination or a city or a university. College, it's a lot more common, but still the exception, not the rule. And then with athletes, look, there's people that think it's a foregone conclusion James Harden wants to come back. Whether that's true or not, and whether that's what you want or not, it's just kind of nice to be wanted, isn't it? You've got Case Keenum said, when Case Keenum was on Texans All Access, he said his choices this offseason, it was going to be between Houston and Buffalo first and foremost. And because he was up in Buffalo, I think that's good for two reasons. One, it's nice that he wants to come back to Houston just because it's nice to be wanted. But also, it's nice because, I don't think Case came here expecting that he was going to have the starting job and somebody else was going to have to earn it. He probably figured there was a really good chance the Texans were going to take a quarterback and he was going to be a backup. So, Case is here because he wants to be in Houston, and he's got a lot of love here in Houston. I think he can be a really good asset for CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud is much more pro ready than Case Keenum was. And obviously on the physical skill side of thing, there's that, but CJ Stroud just ran an offense that was much closer to an NFL offense than what Case was doing. Case, there's a lot of just first read, get rid of the ball stuff quickly, and get rid of the ball quickly type of stuff. And Case would be the first to tell you he had a long ways to go as a rookie, and he did. So he learned a lot, and I think that's where he can really be a valuable tutor. So I want to get you guys have a bunch more comments, but I want to get to some of these Will Anderson quotes. Let's see. Didn't even see the title. I was just going off the conversations. I always forget you guys are having conversations while I'm yapping away too. So apologies for not being more cognizant of y'all's needs.
That kind of that mindset and that tenacity is gonna gravitate people towards me.
Yeah, for me,
okay, so here's Will Anderson. Will Anderson on The Shop. Oh, let me give a little intro here because I'll probably chop this up. So we're gonna do this thing like we're starting fresh, and this will be a standalone video on Will Anderson. I'll do the misleading clickbait thumbnail for it. I have been hearing so much good stuff about Will Anderson that, frankly, for a while, I was starting to believe that it might not be true. And then I remembered, oh yeah, I was saying all this same type of stuff about D'Amico Ryans to people who might have not have believed that it was true about D'Amico Ryans, but it totally is. So with Will Anderson, I'm really starting to get it as I start to see more and more interviews with him and hear people talk about him. He's just the real deal. And he was on The Shop right before the draft. I don't know when this was published, but the interview was right before the draft. And you kind of get a feel for a guy that accepts criticism really well, does things for the right reasons, and just flat out cares a whole lot about football. And it started back in high school, really, when he talks about the way his high school coaches treated him.
Like my high school coach, they did a really good job. So like in high school, like I was one of those type of kids where like at practice, like I didn't mess up a lot. But what they did, like they took it upon themselves. Like if I messed up on one thing, they blew it out of proportion, like embarrassed me.
Yeah. So, and that's not like he was not saying that in a negative way. I know he kind of cut it off there, but he was saying that in a positive way, much like Tom Brady when he was with the Patriots would get called out by Bill Belichick, partly just so Bill Belichick could point to that and say, look, oh, you don't, to some other guy, like, oh, you don't want to be criticized? Like, you're better than Tom Brady? When the best guy on the team is capable of taking that criticism, then it makes it a lot easier. It sets a great example for not just the fact that the coach is going to do it. And I think sometimes this is left out, and this is maybe the most crucial part of it. Really what it is that's such a valuable form of leadership in that the other players look at it and see, how does that guy respond to the criticism? Does he get sensitive? Does he respond positively to it and get better? Or does he sulk about it afterwards or say nasty stuff about the coach? And that's like the real value in it, is that, which is also good advice to a coach. If you're going to pull that tactic, be sure that you're doing it to the right kind of guy. Because if that guy turns around and just starts bad mouthing you to everybody else, you want a guy that actually like knows how to take the criticism and learn from it, and as opposed to getting sensitive by it. So I like that a lot about him. And then the Alabama part of it, where it seems like obviously both Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans feel like guys from Alabama maybe come with a little bit more credibility because they've been through some tough coaching. Here's Will Anderson talking about what it's like playing at Alabama.
When people say Alabama is not for everybody, it's really not for everybody. So the guys that just go there for the rings, those are usually the guys that don't make it. But the ones that can tough it out and have that mental maturity to go in there and handle their business, those are the ones that do good.
Yeah, and I think that part, like when he said the guys that go for the rings don't make it, there's two things about that. One is that, like, the thing that keeps coming up with Will Anderson is just that he is all about like practicing every day, focusing on the team, winning, but like winning next week's game, all that stuff, and not as much about the glory of it. Like I think a lot of scouts and coaches look at that and they want to know, all right, is this a guy that is only in it for the money? Is this a guy that's only in it to elevate his name or whatever it might be? Because what happens is when you draft a guy, and if he's only in it for the money, like there it is, you got it day one. You sign a contract, it's guaranteed, and you don't have anything to play for anymore necessarily after that. Like with Will Anderson, there's a consistent theme of somebody that is playing like through adversity. When the team had struggles this year, he and Bryce Young, as Nick Caserio told us, were the guys that kind of kept everything together. He played in the bowl game when a lot of guys in his position these days aren't playing in the bowl game. That's just like one of the many things that people really like about Will Anderson. This thing that he's about to say here really surprised me. And they asked him about his goals or his dreams about making it in the NFL.
Honestly, if I could sit here and tell you, I wouldn't lie to you, like, could I see any of this coming? Absolutely not. And I made goals, but none of these goals said NFL to this year. Like, none of these goals. Like, for me, I just wanted to go in Alabama and work my butt off every day. Like, that's it, and compete. And I guess with just doing all that and just believing in God and having faith with God, he put some favor over me, and I'm sitting here, so I can just say I'm very blessed.
Yeah, so the other thing about that, too, is when we talk about how hard it is at Alabama, and like Nick Saban makes it really, really hard, it's that, hey, like you don't have to stick around anymore. If you don't like Nick Saban, or if you don't like how hard you have to work, or you just think it's too brutal there, or maybe Alabama's not as good as I thought they were going to be, you can just jet. They've got the transfer portal. You can just go. So I think that's going to be another thing. If you're worried about, like whether your favorite player or quarterback is going to jet after a couple hard seasons or anything, I think that the transfer portal is probably bad in some ways. It's good for athletes, but maybe bad for college football. I think might be a real asset to NFL personnel departments, because they'll look that as a check in your favor. They'll look at that as a check in your favor when guys aren't so quick to jet or get out or try to seek a better circumstance. Not that it's bad when they do or that it's always bad, but like a stick-to-itiveness that you want to stick around, you're really in it and you're attached to that team. I think that means something, especially I guess I'm old now, so it means something to me, and I think it still means a lot to a lot of these old heads that are running things. So the last thing here, and as far as him just not envisioning making the NFL, I just thought that was really cool when you think about some of these clips we've seen of like how like he's like a innocent young child when he's walking into an NFL locker room for the first time, like kind of awestruck. And then he talks about how excited he is just to be a working man in America, that he's got a real job, because earning NIL money is one thing, but it never feels like real. It doesn't feel like a real job. Like any endorsements or anything else I've ever gotten, that doesn't feel like work. It almost feels a little bit like you're kind of getting away with something because it's not work. So like actually getting a paycheck and everything, that's really cool. Like and I like that he is excited about that. He's excited about being a working man in America. There's a lot to love about him. So last thing. Now this I loved. This was one of the coolest things I've seen a first round draft pick say, because I always worry sometimes when I watch guys get drafted that, yes, by all means, enjoy the moment and be happy, and your family should be proud of you, but don't act like that's the final culmination of things. Like, you've got a long ways to go still. So this from Will Anderson right here was really cool.
I think about it. I haven't made it. I got here. I haven't made it until I'm done. That's how my mindset is. I'm working every day, like, no matter, like, the person behind me taking my position. Like, that's how I was at Alabama. Through all the accolades, through all the awards, everything, like, I just got here. I never played an NFL snap. I've never been in an NFL building, so I haven't made it anywhere. I'm just arrived at my, my destination I'm going to be at, you know what I'm saying? So that's how I'm approaching that.
Yeah, so, like, the appropriate level of humility there, obviously. The other thing, too, I'd say about the CJ Stroud video we'd watched, where those of you just joining us, he talks about the chip on his shoulder and how he felt put off by Quinn Ewers showing up a couple weeks before the season in 2021 and thought that was disrespectful by Ohio State. We clarified the story where it was more, that was Quinn Ewers showing up. It wasn't Ohio State wanting him there. But I think that, like, it's important to remember when we're watching that CJ Stroud stuff that he was specifically being asked questions about having a chip on his shoulder or what motivated him or drove him. There have been a lot of other times where he very much talks about staying humble, being humble, caring about his teammates, all that stuff. Sometimes the context of the interview matters. But as far as where Will Anderson is right there, like, I don't think there's any part of Will Anderson that thinks he's going to walk in and all of the veterans on the team are going to, kneel at his feet so he can deliver wisdom unto them. He gets it. He knows that he's going to have to work at it. And I just, I think that I can understand the excitement over him as a coach or a personnel person, in that he's got the physical tools. I do feel better about how D'Amico is going to use him based on what D'Amico and Will Anderson have said. That I think some of my concerns about him and how his game would transfer to college or to the NFL, I think we're overblown or are overblown, because he's going to be used in a different way, in a much more focused way than he was at Alabama. He was, and not that it was bad the way he was used at Alabama. It's just in the NFL, at least early on, they're going to very much focus on developing him into a pure pass rusher. So I'm excited about that part of it. But that also, he's like, it's really hard to envision him not doing everything he needs to do to succeed. He's going to accept coaching. He's going to be a good teammate. He's going to be motivated. He's going to do all those things. So I'm cool. Everyone is all hot on Jadeveon Clowney, and poof, never really was what he was hyped up to be. Clowney has barely become a good player today. You're a little too extreme on the second part of that. Because he's been a very solid football player. The thing that's weird about Clowney is that he kind of lacks flexibility and the ability to close the deal on a lot of his sacks. So he ends up with a boatload of pressures. He ends up with tackles for loss. He's like lethal in the run game. But yeah, he's not the ultimate and pure pass rusher. So, but I also think there was a healthy amount of skepticism about Clowney. There was, questions about his senior year and the production there. So, I don't know, you could paint it either way you want. He wasn't a complete and total bust. Was he worth the number 1 overall pick? Very few people ever are, because you basically have to be J.J. Watt to prove that you were worth a number 1 overall pick. So it's, Mario Williams, I would say likewise. Mario Williams ends up being one of the career sack leaders in NFL history. And I don't know where he is on the list. I mean, it's not super high up there, but also, wasn't Hall of Fame caliber. I feel like unless you're Hall of Fame caliber, people don't feel like you're going to be worth number 1 overall. I see a lot of people are having a whole lot of discussion about Davis Mills versus Case Keenum versus CJ Stroud. I'm going to stay the hell out of that. But because of that conversation, I'm going to have a hard time picking out relevant quotes from these. Let's do one more. I saw a Football Life episode on Franco Harris. The Texans look an awful lot like some of the dynasties when they weren't playoff teams yet. It's exciting. I'll tell you what, Rotten Oxford. Maybe I'm overhyping. Maybe I overhyped Jadeveon Clowney back in the day, but I feel like I'm going to accept your overhyping of the Texans as being potentially on par with the Pittsburgh Steelers, except unlike the Pittsburgh Steelers of the 70s, the Texans won't be allowed to take massive, massive amounts of Diana ball. Good day, everybody.